which was written by a British academic from the University of Derby, but he has done an excellent job of capturing all of the history of the Delta ministry in relationship to the civil rights movement, and begins with a brief summary that I think kind of sets the stage for what John and I will be sharing about. So I just wanted to read that introduction to kind of set the stage. Mississippi provided the stiffest and most determined resistance to the demands of the civil rights movement for racial equality in the early 1960s. The state's African Americans, particularly in the Yazoo, Mississippi Delta, also endured some of the nation's lowest levels of income, health, and education. The Magnolia State presented the greatest challenge to the movement, but also its greatest opportunity, since a success in overcoming discrimination in Mississippi would provide additional inspiration, improved morale, and perhaps even a model for civil rights activities in other states. Movement activists appealed to the National Council of Churches in New York that comprised most of America's mainstream Protestant and Orthodox denominations to end the struggle in Mississippi. Prominent National Council staff and leaders were eager to participate in the Southern civil rights struggle in the belief that God was working through the movement. At the suggestion of and in cooperation with civil rights leaders of the Delta, in September of 1964, the National Council of Churches inaugurated the Delta Ministry. It was a 10-year program of relief, literacy, voter registration, economic development, and community mobilization, primarily in the Delta of Mississippi, with other projects in Hattiesburg and Macomb. At its height, in the mid-1960s, the ministry had 55 staff and volunteers. By 1967, it maintained the largest contingent of civil rights field staff in the South, nearly half the number of the region. While civil rights groups such as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which we call SNCC, which was formed here at Shaw University, some of you may know, and the Congress for Racial Equality, CORE, imploded in the second half of the 1960s, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, with which Martin Luther King was associated, focused more on their efforts on the North and in opposing the Vietnam War. The Delta Ministry, however, continued its work in Mississippi and filled the vacuum that the other groups left behind. So that's kind of the overview of the Delta Ministry, and John and I are just going to share some dialogue, and we hope to allow enough time so any questions that you might have, we invite you to raise with us. John, do you want to say anything to begin with, or? Go ahead. Go ahead, okay.
Just one more quick thing.
Okay. Well, for me, and this is thanks to Wesley, my son-in-law's father, who got us together and realized we had this common history. For me, going back to Mississippi in the 1960s is kind of like opening a can of worms, because it could just go so many different ways. There were so many aspects to it. But tell us about what it was like for you as a native Mississippian in the 60s in Greenville. And this, of course, is all post the murder of Emmett Till in 1955. So what was it like for you growing up in Greenville during that period?
tough. Let me just start with a quick statement that kind of attaches to what you said.
Okay.
That has to do with a little bit of history and background about the Delta ministry. It played, of course, as he said, a major role in the African-American civil rights movement in Mississippi. But what many people do not know is that the Delta ministry was the reason some 70,000 black people were registered to vote. That was very significant. The other thing is that they did a bunch of things in terms of health programs. And without reading the statement any further, that just adds to the history. But before I go any further, there are a couple of things I need to say. They say confession is good for the soul. I want you all to know, Max is sitting up here waiting for me, so are you, and I apologize. I'm at the wrong church. Now, my daughter who is with me, I will never hear the end of my advanced denial for hearing aids. Max is just had cataract surgery. I'm in an advanced state of denial because I heard the wrong church. So, the important thing though is that even at our ages and at our point in our development, we are still hanging in there. I will be turning 75 years of age. I'm still struggling in civil rights matters. Max is brought all of this together so that what we fought for, what we stood for, what we struggled for is not only still alive, but the knowledge, the information is being carried on even in our advanced years. Amen. The other thing I want to say real quick about the Delta ministry is that it had self-help programs that involved the development of indigenous leadership. That was a major focus of the Delta ministry. I am one of the products of that Delta ministry. Fast forward 50 years later, I'm honored to have been a product of that. Now, fast forward another 40 years later, my daughter, who is accompanying me, whom I'm very, very proud of, whose work is on CORE and has been brought up in a civil rights family, who is carrying that on, that struggle of knowledge, information about the need for human and civil rights, is here with me. I don't mean to embarrass her, but all her life I've kind of done that. And this is not going to be an exception. She'll just have to touch it there. She has just received a Fulbright scholarship to study in Norway. I'm very proud of her. She may not have wanted me to announce that. However, I am announced it. I am very proud of her, and I will not hear the end of that. But then that's the story of my life. Back to the Delta ministry. The Delta ministry, and when I say a product of the Delta ministry, as a black man from Mississippi, to see all of these non-black folks coming from all over this country to do things with us and for us was a totally unprecedented experience. I want to take a couple of minutes, Mac, and just get into the spin-offs of that kind of commitment, so I can show a little bit of what has resulted. Take me 3 minutes to do this.
I'm trying to believe that.
One of the spin-offs, and I'm not going to deal with the prepared stuff, one of the spin-offs is that the motivation of all these caring people that were not black, that were there, going through enormous strains and struggles, which I had never, ever seen in my lifetime. None of us in Mississippi had seen this large a number of white people doing things at the level at which they were doing them, which involves, I want to point out, some considerable serious risk that was a guiding source and motivation for us to do things and to achieve things. One example, growing up in Mississippi, amidst all the pain and violence, growing up in Greenville, of course I got arrested in Greenville, I got expelled from high school in Greenville, got expelled from high school for honoring the Supreme Court's desegregation decision, wore an armband. Medgar Evers came to Greenville and said to the high school principal, if you all don't reinstate him, we're going to march him down to the white school and register him, whereupon I was immediately reinstated back to the school that I was expelled from. But the motivation to have the guts and courage to honor a Supreme Court's decision was significant, and there's no way as a black man growing up in Mississippi I could have got that by myself. I had help. Many, many black Mississippians had help. We've changed things in Mississippi because the Delta Ministry registered 70,000 black people to vote. That's just one spinoff. Another spinoff was the courage and guts to stand up and not go to the back seat of a bus. I was ordered, and this is written about in a book called Portrait of a Decade, to go to the back seat of a bus, and I refused to do that. The result, of course, was that I was arrested, took the FBI and Medgar Evers 3 days to find me. They stripped me naked and beat me with a barbershop strap. The FBI and Medgar Evers could not find me because the sheriff would not let me use the telephone. And therefore, the FBI put out a nationwide search. As a result, I was eventually found in 4 days. But I want to talk about that group and how they inspired courage. Because I knew I was not alone. I knew that. The presence of people of commitment and responsibility gave me courage. And so that beating they gave me in the jail, I endured that. And I survived that. To come even further than that, to try to become the first black man to enter the University of Southern Mississippi, after they arrested the first black man and for stealing, supposedly, $25 worth of chicken feed. They arrested him, put him in jail, whereupon they poisoned him to death. The governor subsequently of Mississippi some years ago finally apologized for that. I took up his struggle. I need you to understand the people of the Delta Ministry were doing bold, unheard of, audacious, and courageous things. And I'm very honored, and I'm not going to get emotional with tears coming to my eyes, but when I talk about this and the courage that I saw physically around me, all these people, and not just saw them doing stuff, they came and they stayed over 23 years. And because they stayed over 23 years, because of the work that they did, the level of inspiration and courage that allowed a lot of us to do a lot of the things that we've done, I don't want that underestimated, and I don't want that seen as some minor something. It was not minor. Believe me, Max and I are being very polite and diplomatic here with you because these people went through all kinds of things. A white man was arrested with me because he was just riding in the car, and they beat him, and they beat me, and they arrested both of us. I want you to fast forward, however, some years later. I have to thank my daughter for this, who forced me to do this, to go back to Mississippi and speak at the University of Southern Mississippi. when I tried to become the first black man to get in that university, there was a whole series of things that went on. I went back and had the opportunity to speak at the very school by their invitation that had denied me entrance. And part of what happened at that point was a call 40, 50 years later to look at the era of that level of development and perspective back in the 60s. And that's part of the invitation I'd like to extend, is that as a species, we are committing errors of galactic magnitude to our planet and to each other. And the extent to which we can understand and try to correct and do something about our errors of whatever kind they are, race, environment, whatever kind they are, that is injurious, can have far-reaching effects. And I stand here as a physical result of that. And I'm not going to go on with all the stories that I can tell you, but Max and I had 2-hour lunch, and he can tell you, he has a bunch, I have a bunch. It's important, though, to understand that your level of caring and listening that allowed you to even be here is very significant. Don't underestimate the little tiny things. The matter of presence makes all the difference in the world. Just presence. You don't have to always be doing courageous things. Presence alone is a very significant and powerful activity in the human effort of struggling to be better and higher persons. What was life like in Mississippi? Not very good. To make a point. The question becomes, however, with life not being very good, what are you supposed to do with that reality? So the question is not how many problems we have, but what do we do to solve them? The Delta Ministry provided a model at every level, educational programs, registering to vote, providing us food, providing us clothes, doing teaching. At every level, the Delta Ministry in Mississippi provided the basis for a great deal of the motivation, the civil rights activities, and the struggles that came out of Mississippi. And I don't want that underestimated. And in order to make that point, I had to use 2 or 3 personal stories in that regard. My daughter, who is a brilliant researcher, found through the commission papers. Where is she? Oh, there you go. I know, I'm good. Through the commission papers, one of the ways they tried to keep me out of the University of Southern Mississippi in those days was, it was very bad, to label somebody homosexual. So the head of the Supreme Court of Mississippi, the governor of Mississippi, and the president of University of Southern Mississippi, when I tried to register as a student, met me with this letter. And the letter said, "You are a known homosexual. And as a known homosexual, we do not believe the United States Justice Department and the NAACP will allow you to enter this university to register to get an education." They read me that letter. The last thing I remember was launching forward to snatch the letter out of his hand. The American Civil Liberties Union, 25 or more years later, gave us all a choice. Do you want this information disclosed, the judge said, or do you want a record? I said, whatever the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission said about me, which was the official arm, it was like the Mississippi FBI, I want it public. But getting back to what you do with information, what you do with the situation makes all the difference. In my case, When they did that, I called my family in, my wife, my son, my daughter here. and I said, you know, this letter says I'm a known homosexual, and I said, I've wanted to tell you guys this all my life. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to put on this act, right? And I said, you know, there's this woman inside of me, and this woman has been trying to get out. In the meantime, my son, of course, is, my daughter here is rolling on the floor laughing. She knows. My son is in hysterics. And I said, you know, I just don't know. I must have not been a homosexual because y'all are bored, and I have 2 kids, so I don't know what. The point is that you take that and ugly things. You take ugly things, wrongful things, painful things, and you do positive stuff with it. That's the long and the short of that. Starting with something as simple as presence. Being there. And that's what the Delta ministry was for us for over 23 years. They were present in addition to all the things that they did. Back, the quick summary, and then whatever interaction we want to get into, I'd love to, is that we are faced today with problems, in my opinion, worse than those we had in Mississippi at a broader scale. At the scale of the environment, at the scale of destruction of the planet, at the scale of global conflict and confusion, at the scale of misunderstanding about issues of race, and the extent to which we understand that presence alone, as well as commitment, can give rise to extraordinary things. I stood on the stage of the University of Southern Mississippi that denied me the right to enter. And I didn't mean to be arrogant, but I said to those people, you know, you all turned me down. You said I wasn't good enough. First they said I didn't make the right grades. Then they said I was homosexual. Then they said, I mean, there was just a list of official reasons why they denied me entry. And I said, just for your information, Harvard didn't say any of that. Just for your information, Oxford University in England didn't say any of that. And I've been to both places. It's what you, it's what you do. It's what you do with conflict. It's what the Delta ministry did for us. I'm very honored and privileged to be here right now because I could be dead. But it was because of folks like Mac Hulslander and hundreds of them that came because they saw things were wrong and they wanted to do something about that. And I'm honored 50 some odd years later to have helped to produce a child, and you know fathers, they keep them under pressure, that I've said now the Fulbright Scholarship has designated you as an international scholar to study in Oslo, Switzerland. I want you to get on a Nobel Peace Prize train. And
no pressure.
You're in trouble. The point is that I just want to take something that happened years and years and years and years ago and show what, you look at it 50 years later, what are some of the results of that? PRYMMP came out of Mississippi. Leontine Price came out of Mississippi. And I'm not saying that I'm anywhere at those people's level, but the point is that the presence of caring people, whether you are a caring parent, can make all the difference in your child's life. The presence of a caring person on a social or political issue that's a problem can make all the difference in the world. And if there's anything I want to do is to say to Max, thank you. I want to say to all the people with the Delta Ministry, the hundreds of people that put over 25 years of their life and their work into helping people in a place they didn't even live in. I want to say thank you to those people. And I want to say thank you to you, in conclusion, for even allowing me to tell this story, because I think people frequently underestimate their value and their importance to other people and other situations. And I think they feel helpless sometimes, and frustrated sometimes, and angry sometimes, and confused sometimes, and sometimes they just ignore stuff because I can't do anything about it. But 50 years later, or longer, I invite each one of you to look at just part of the results of the presence of the Delta Ministry.
Thank you, John. You know, so often in life, I'm sure that you all can identify with this, but so many of the things that we do, we never really see the results of. A lot of things are long-term, and we may have had a piece, a very small piece even, in that, but to be here and do goodness. Thank you. Well, John was supposed to ask me how I came to Mississippi. But since he didn't ask me, I'm going to tell you. I don't know always what the reasons are for things in life, but as a young man, even in high school, for whatever reason, I had a fascination with race relations. And I remember writing stories, even as a high schooler, about the racial situation in our country. In college, I had the opportunity to go as an exchange student to Howard University, which many of you may know is in Washington. It's a predominantly black school. And that was a very consciousness-raising experience for me, John. It was in 1960, so it was kind of still at the front end of a lot of the civil rights activities. But we were picketing Woolworths in D.C. at that time. But from Howard, I had already committed to go to Japan on the mission field with the Methodist Global Board of Missions. And so, even though I had in my heart a real commitment to civil rights, I was also committed to this program. So I went to Japan in 1961 to 64. But as soon as I got back, I wanted to get into things with the civil rights movement. And part of my experience after coming back from Japan was to work with what was called the campus travel staff of the Methodist Church. And I would travel deliberately by choice to colleges and universities in the South. And what I experienced in doing that was that so often, and I think particularly in Mississippi, I would meet with a white student group over here and a black Methodist student group over here. And they were so imprisoned in each of their worlds that they longed to connect, but they didn't know how. So enter Mac Hulslander, the outside agitator, who says, well, use me as an excuse I'll call the campus minister over here, and let's get together. We'll take a carload over and meet. And I began to realize that one of the benefits of being an outsider was I wasn't in the system in terms of expectations and so on. I was this naive outsider who didn't know much about what the local culture was. So that enabled me to do things like that, and I thought I can use this to the benefit of bringing people together and communication. So my first experience with the Delta ministry was in the summer of '65. Some plantation tractor drivers in the Mississippi area, they were making $6 a day for work from sunup to sundown. Very, very difficult, labor intensive. This is a big cotton growing area of Mississippi. And the Mississippi Freedom, labor, not the party, but the labor union had formed. And these tractor drivers decided to go on strike for higher wages. Well, they had just gone on strike and had been evicted from the plantation, and very literally all of their earthly possessions, which were very, very meager, were thrown in the ditch. And that's when I arrived in Mississippi. So one of my first tasks was to collect whatever we could salvage from them and to provide immediate housing and food for these displaced plantation workers. We set up something that was called Strike City. And, through the National Council of Churches, tents and other supplies were shipped in, and we offered temporary housing for them. So that was my first experience in the summer of '65. I entered theological school in the fall of 1965 at Union, and the Delta ministry was already underway, and there was something the various seminary students were getting together from Yale and Drew and all over to talk about what is our response to the civil rights movement? What is God doing through this, and how do we connect with that? And so something was organized called the Student Interracial Ministry. And SIM, for short, worked out a relationship with the Delta ministry as one of its placements. There were many. A lot of the students would go to pastorates, blacks into white congregations, whites into black congregations. In fact, here in Raleigh, some of our interracial ministry students served at Davie Street Presbyterian in downtown Raleigh. And but I asked if I could be stationed with the Delta ministry and go back to Mississippi. And so that's what I did. I spent the summer of '66 there, which was the time that some of the striking families and some others from what was called the Poor People's Movement were moved to a place called Mount Beulah, which had been a Disciples of Christ school campus. So that became the headquarters for the Delta ministry. My job at first was to teach. Well, these kids were just, if any of them had been to school, their experiences in school had been very negative. And so it wasn't long before I was in this classroom and books were being thrown around the room, and discipline was just kind of non-existent. And I didn't have all the skills that veteran teachers would have in that situation. So anyway, the transformation that was so dramatic, though, was when we finally, the Delta ministry was able to obtain 400 acres of land in the Greenville area with the idea of creating what was, in one director's idea, something like a kibbutzim in Israel, a community where the land would be owned in cooperation and so on and so on. Much of it chronological in this book. But what was so dramatic, John, was to take these kids and move to, who are in such transition, so much unknown about their life, and to move to the land and begin life there. And I took the kids and we took over an old shack, and they created their own school. Blackboards, desks, everything from scratch. And I was exposed to Sylvia Ashton Warner's book, Teacher. She taught Maori children in New Zealand. And she had some very interesting ideas about teaching. And for example, each day the kids would come to school, I would just say, what word do you want to learn today? And they would tell me what word it was, and I didn't censor. And I would write that on a card, and they would collect these card decks of these words that were special to them. And then I said, rather than reading stories out of books, tell me your stories, and I will write them down and we'll learn to read them. So they would tell me these interesting stories about growing up in Mississippi, and I would write the story, and then they would learn to read using their own experience. Well, the transformation in their lives was just so dramatic, from hating school to just being insatiable. The deal was that they had to do some work in the fields. So they would do everything to wait as long as they could before they had to go out. They would stay in that school, and they, as I said, they were just insatiable in their desire to learn. And that was wonderful to observe. Well, we're getting close to time. We want to at least allow some time for you to ask questions while we're here together. So I'm going to end it there and invite you all, if you have questions you'd like to raise for John or I, please. Oh, just one other thing that I do want to say. The Methodist Church has, through almost all the time of the Delta ministry, been very, very supportive. And many times they came to the rescue of the Delta ministry and Freedom City in particular. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to just thank Highland and the Methodist Church for all that they have done as part of the National Council of Churches to make the Delta ministry possible. Thank you.
Yes, Steve Michael, the pastor here at Highland. I want to welcome you formally to this place. Thank you for being here. You have taught us and inspired us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A question for you, though. You talked about the fact that maybe we live in a time that's more frightening and ripe for struggle than any other time. Talk about that. What are those things that you're seeing right now? You talked about environment. Are there other areas? Tell us a little bit more about that. We'd like to hear.
What was his question?
The issue of things being worse today, we've got more problems today in lots of respects. That has created more. We've poisoned the environment. We've done a lot of things that's a problem, and they are worse, in my opinion, today. Understand, I'm not denying the progress. That's to be commended. However, young black kids in this state are male are among the lowest on the academic scale. And then I've got a laundry list at that level, which I won't go through. But the point is, and we are seeing a trek for young black males to go to prison. There's a book called The New Jim Crow. And there's too many black folks killing each other, too many black folks going to prison, too many white folks psychologically confused. We're in a phenomenon of mass murders that we've never seen before. So understand, problems are not just racial. Racial is one of the problems that we've got. But we've got to back up and look at our level of development and how we respond to problems and issues. We, in my opinion, have more problems today at a broader scale than we had in the 60s. My PhD from Columbia daughter here, I made her pick cotton with her PhD because I picked cotton at $2.50 a day so she can understand what it means to bend over all day in the hot sun. Of course, after 45 minutes, she and my son were saying, "Look, Bob, this is ridiculous." But I needed them to understand and to experience the pain. And we've got mega problems today that, I repeat, in my opinion, are worse than what we had. But again, it's what we do with those problems that makes the difference. We have a program at Duke University called No One Dies Alone, where we're a team. I sit with people, the whole team, in the last 72 hours of their life when they're dying. We then chronicle that so that the family members have some memory, some content in the last hours of their life. For me, and I also volunteer at the Cancer Center at Duke University, for me, that is a significant use of the pain and agony. What you have to do with problems in your life is transform them into positive results that's going to help you, first of all, and help somebody else, second of all. I don't have time to be hating and mad at the folks that arrested me, because by the same token, there was and I hope no news reporters are here and will pursue this story, but when I was arrested and beaten, the wife of the sheriff sneaked in and put some soup in my mouth where my lips were busted. You got to understand, as a white woman in Mississippi, if the sheriff had found that out, she'd be dead. She would have killed her. You got to understand that the risks that people take, the things that people do, have to do with their understanding of their connectivity to the issue. Starting with something as simple as present. My wife used to say to me, you have to learn how to back up and be still. Never quite learned how to do that. but before she died of bone marrow cancer, that's what she used to tell me. If we can back up and be still for a moment and see what the stillness brings to us, we could come to terms with something.
You have a question?
Yes, sir.
It seems to me, I felt for a long time that the basis of racism is really economic conditions.
Yes.
Because we don't like poor people, basically. And we look down on poor people as a society generally. So I think that we've got to do something about the inequality of income across this country if we're going to solve this problem of racism.
What he says is he thinks the problem of racism, correct me if I say anything that he didn't say, is economically based, and that we've got to do something about the economics of poor people. That we don't like poor people because they're poor. And we have to do something about that. I totally agree with that. We have to change the economic structures and relationships of poor people. I had the honor of serving 2 governors of the state as a senior policy advisor. Now, I mean, I hate to use this analogy. We're like the Ehrlichmans and Haldermans in the governor's office, where we tell the governor what to do. And I had that privilege for both a Republican governor and a Democratic governor. And back to his point, we have to change the economic structure of our relationship with poor people. Now, Mr. Warren Buffett, one of my heroes, clearly understands this. Bill Gates, another one of my heroes, clearly understands this. And they are taking millions of dollars in their assets and doing things like providing health care, drinking water. You're absolutely right. We have to change it, racist, economic relationships in America. We also have to change them in the world.
One other thing, education is a way out of poverty, but poverty is the greatest handicap for people getting education.
Oh, that's so profound. Could you say that louder? And I don't know that I'm even worthy to say that again. Education
is the way out of poverty.
Is the way out of poverty.
But poverty is the biggest handicap to education.
But poverty is the biggest handicap to education.
Amen.
Can't add anything to that for saying. Yes, that is awesome. Yes, sir.
So I'm going, since I talk to you all the time, I'm going to.
Oh,
Okay.
You have a question?
Yes.
Oh, Tim, all right. notice that question is Tim. I'm in such trouble.
Not yet, not in front of people. But, okay, so both of you have talked about being out of the country, which I think is really interesting. And I'd like to hear you talk about how you felt with you being in Oxford and you being in Japan, while all of these incredible events are taking place. Do you feel that this is not a space you're supposed to be in, you should rush home, or do you feel like you're learning and gaining something that will provide the tools that will allow you to go back to the spaces? I just really wanted to hear your thoughts about sort of what mindset were you in while you're abroad in all of these